In this week's video, I'm going to show you how you can avoid blur so you get nice sharp images, but I'm also going to show you how you can use blur for effect to make your pictures more creative and improve your photography. Hi, Paul here from PhotoGenius. Welcome to my channel, which is all about helping you get more from your digital camera so you can take better photos. I post new videos every single week. Sometimes they're photography tutorials, sometimes they're gear reviews. Occasionally we do these photography challenges as well. And if you don't want to miss out on these and future videos, please consider subscribing. This video is all about blur, how we can avoid it, but also how we can use it for effect to make our pictures more interesting and more engaging. Now, generally, as photographers, we try to avoid blur. We try to make sure everything is nice and sharp and in focus. But if you're clever, you can use blur for effect, maybe as a way of steering the viewer to the subject, or maybe as a way of showing motion and speed. And if you want to follow along with this week's tutorial, grab your camera and make sure you're out of the auto mode. If you're feeling confident with your camera, you can set it into manual. If you're a beginner, the mode I recommend is the P mode, because these modes will allow you to control some of the camera settings. Now, I want to begin by talking about what I like to call the three different types of blur, or at least the three things that affect blur. Number one being focus, number two being motion and movement, and number three being depth of field. So one very common mistake that I often see people making when they're taking photos is not taking control of the camera's focus points. The focus points allow you to show the camera or tell the camera where the subject is and where you want it to focus. If you don't do this, the camera makes an assumption on what the subject is, and whilst it will get it right sometimes, it will get it wrong sometimes. Let me show you what I mean. For this demonstration, the subject is the single tomato on the cutting board. I'm using a Canon DSLR camera in the aperture priority mode. Now, once I press the shutter button, the self timer starts to count down to 0, then the camera takes an image. And what we see in this image is the tomato is actually blurry, and this is simply because I just let the camera decide what to focus on, and it chose the salt pot, which is no surprise because it's closer to the camera than the tomato. Now, to fix this, I'm going to choose one focus point. I'm going for the middle one, and this allows me to control where and on what the camera focuses on. And now we can clearly see the tomato is sharp and in focus. And this is because the tomato was in the center of the frame and I chose to use the center focus point. And just for fun, but also as a reminder of why I encourage people to get out of auto, I put the camera into the full auto mode for a third shot. Note how the camera decides to pop the flash up. And in my opinion, this is the worst of the three images by far. Now, I want to show you just how easy it is to control your camera's focus points, and I'm going to demonstrate this first on a Canon camera followed by a Nikon camera. Using the button on the back of the camera, we can select autofocus point selection. Turning the dial on the top of the camera allows us to choose a focus point. Pressing the shutter button halfway down locks it in. To control the focus on this Nikon camera, we begin by pressing the I button. We then select the autofocus area mode and press OK, and select single point autofocus and once again press OK. The camera defaults to the center focus point, but using the multi-selector button, we are free now to choose whichever focus point we wish. So now you know how to control your camera's focus points. You can use this feature to not only ensure that your subject is sharp and in focus, but if you're clever, you can use it in a creative sense to take photos like these. Now, before we go any further, I want to mention a very special offer from Skillshare, who have kindly sponsored this video. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives, offering thousands of inspirational classes for creators and creatives alike, with topics that include design, illustration, video, photography, web design, and much, much more. Skillshare is a fun and informative way to learn new skills with no ads and all for less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. Now, if you want to check out these classes for yourself, you can, because for a limited time, all you've got to do is click on the link in the description below this video to get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. Members get unlimited access to thousands of inspiring classes that include hands-on projects and even feedback from a community of millions. So if you want to improve your creative skills, why not try something new or build on existing passions? Make sure you click on the link below, and remember, the first 1,000 people who do will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium. Now, motion blur is another common problem and is caused when either the subject moves or the camera moves whilst the picture is being taken. So I'm going to demonstrate to you how easy it is to avoid this, but also I'm going to demonstrate to you how you can use it in a creative way to make your pictures more interesting and more engaging. And your camera's shutter speed plays a big part in this one. Taking some photos of subjects like the local pelicans can be tricky because not only are they moving, but I'm also shooting handheld with a long telephoto lens. Now, these two images were taken seconds apart. One is sharp and detailed and one is not. The sharp image was taken with a shutter speed of 1/1000th of a second. The other was shot at a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second. And because this shutter speed is slower and the shutter was opened longer, the camera has actually recorded my handshake, which in turn makes the image look blurry. So this shows that using a faster shutter speed can help stop camera movement causing blurry photos. Better still is to use a tripod. But of course, slow shutter speeds can also be selected to purposely add blur to an image. These abstract images I took in my garden using a technique called ICM, or intentional camera movement. Here I'm purposely moving the camera with the bikes to give a feeling of movement, motion and speed by blurring the background. Which is the opposite of this image where I'm holding the camera steady so the buildings are sharp, but this time the bike blurs. Now, the next type of blur that I want to talk about is depth of field, which is related to focus blur, but is more specifically defined as the parts of your image that are acceptably sharp in front of the subject and also behind the subject. Let's start by taking a look at some examples. With these images, the background is very blurry and out of focus. This is called a shallow depth of field. Now, this is a really great technique as it makes the subject stand out. Now, depth of field doesn't just affect backgrounds. In this image, we can clearly see that the people in the foreground are also out of focus as well as the background. So this is a great technique as it makes the subject stand out as the eye is drawn to things that are in focus rather than out of focus. Now, this technique is very popular with portrait photographers, but how exactly do you control depth of field? Well, let me talk you through the basics. Depth of field is controlled predominantly by the aperture within the lens. With this image, all three cameras are sharp. This is a greater depth of field and is a result of using a smaller aperture. In this second image, the front camera is now in focus, but the rest are blurry. Now, this is called a shallow depth of field, and this is the result of using a wider aperture. So the more we close down the aperture, the greater the depth of field will be, which brings me nicely to landscape photographers. Now, with landscape photography, typically you want a big, long, extended depth of field. You want as much sharpness in your image as possible. So for that reason, most landscape photographers will shoot with an aperture of around about f11 to f16 for a greater depth of field. Now, this is an urban landscape rather than a natural landscape image, but the same rules apply. I shot this image with the aperture at f11 to give this image a sharp foreground and a sharp background. This is a greater depth of field. But as the theme of this video has been blur, I thought this would be the ideal image to close the video with, as the slow shutter speed has caused the cars to blur to the extent where they are actually not visible. All we get to see is the light trails left from the cars as they go up the freeway. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really makes a big difference and it helps the channel grow. And the more the channel grows, the more content I can make. Talking of content, new videos every week. So if you're not already subscribed, consider subscribing. I hope you've enjoyed learning about blur, both from a way of avoiding it and also encouraging it and using it creatively. Leave your comments, suggestions and questions down below, and I hope to see you again sometime soon. See ya. Bye.